We begin today at our nation's southern border with anxiety growing. Any moment now, a judge could rule on whether or not a pandemic-era policy that allowed Border Patrol to send migrants back faster will stay in place. NewsNation correspondent Robert Sherman is live in Hidalgo, Texas. So, Robert, how are people feeling ahead of this decision?
I got to tell you, Nicole, there's a lot of anxiety in the air as people await this ruling. We actually just got off the phone with the judge's office. They say that they're finishing the briefing now, and we should have a ruling on Title 42 soon. But there is this anxiety in the air down here. A lot of officials question whether they would be able to handle a potential surge after Title 42. You even have the city of El Paso, Texas, which has tossed around the idea of declaring a state of emergency over the matter. Here's the reason why. You take a look at the April numbers. Over 234,000 migrants were encountered at the southern border. That is a DHS all-time high. You break that down, it comes out to almost 8,000 migrant encounters per day. Well, some of these DHS estimates suggest that if Title 42 expires, they could see as high as 18,000 migrant encounters a day. And that's why we hear law enforcement tell us that they would like to see Title 42 at the very least extended, because they do use it as a tool to, on the one hand, deter migrant crossings, but on the other hand, expediently remove those who do cross into the United States illegally. The mayor pro tem of Eagle Pass, Texas, told some of our colleagues over at BorderReport.com they don't know what they're going to do without it. Listen to this.
Title 42 is the only thing that we have in place right now in the United States to try to prevent that influx from coming in. We're asking the judge, we're asking anybody that has anything to do with making this decision that please, it needs to stay.
Still, there are those who believe that because Title 42 is a public health policy, and you've seen other health regulations expire regarding the pandemic over the last couple of weeks, it's time for this one to go as well. They also believe that once Title 42 goes away, that will allow the way to be paved for overarching immigration reform. And we do hear people, both Republicans and Democrats down on the border, agreeing on that subject matter, that in the end, overarching immigration reform is what's required. Title 42 is merely a Band-Aid. When Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas from the Department of Homeland Security was down here earlier this week, he said that if Title 42 is upheld by that judge over in Louisiana, he says they will have the Department of Justice look at it and evaluate what their course of action will be. But he does contend they will be abiding by the rule of law, whatever that may be, come Monday. Nicole?
All right, well, Robert, it sounds like we just got the news in. This is literally breaking right now. They have granted that injunction. It sounds like it will, in fact, stay in place. So what are those border communities around there? You know, what are they expecting?
Well, if that does remain in place, then what that would mean to them is that a lot of people that we've been talking with would be relieved at that, because they say that that if you look at those numbers of what we see now, the mayor of McAllen described the situation as presently manageable. So if those surges were to come on Monday, he's told us that he wouldn't know what would possibly happen, that they just simply don't have the resources in their community. I mean, a lot of these border towns, Nicole, these are not sprawling metropolitan areas. These are small towns of some as small as a couple hundred, others maybe just a few thousand. So the number of resources are finite. That's what has made so many people so worried.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and Robert, I know you obviously have been covering this at this point for months right now, talking to those border communities, talking to officials, you know, quoting the mayor there. But what about Border Patrol agents? I mean, they have truly been overwhelmed.
And that is a big issue. Whenever we talk with the National Border Patrol Council, he puts it simply this way, is that Border Patrol agents have become border processing agents with the number of people that come across the border. Legally speaking, once someone crosses into the United States illegally, Border Patrol agents must pursue that person and process them. Well, when that happens, you take Border Patrol agents out of the field. That creates more gaps in the border and the defenses on the southern border. And that's when you see the other side of the border crisis, which everyone contends are different. But that's where you see drugs crossing into the United States, human smuggling as well. It creates more opportunity there. That's the other aspect down here that worries people the most. The two crises they describe as different, but they do play into one another.
You know, and Robert, let's just talk about, there are people who have been camping out at the border, kind of waiting to see whether or not this decision would happen, and then planning to attempt to cross, correct?
There have been, and we have seen those reports, especially in some of the sister cities over in Mexico, such as across from Laredo. Juarez is always a very popular spot for migrants to gather before crossing over into the El Paso region up that way. So this is something that we have been monitoring over the last couple of weeks. Texas DPS said that even in the Del Rio area, they've started to see a bit more activity on the other side of the border. So it is still unclear if those migrants that have made their way to some of those border communities will still attempt to cross on Monday. That still remains to be seen. But of course, there are now these new stipulations in place.
Yeah, so that border restriction policy to remain in place. Robert, tell us just about some of the people that you've met along the way during your coverage, throughout your coverage of this.
Well, I would say, Nichole, is that we've met a lot of people down here, and of course, everyone has their own perspective. You realize that this is not a simple issue that everyone makes it out to be. And sometimes when we look at the conversation between Republicans and Democrats, it seems like it's one side or the other. But there are a lot of complications down here. You talk to ranchers who have to deal with people coming through their property every night, and that destroys their whole livelihood when their crops are destroyed or when their cattle are startled or end up being cut loose. I mean, it has impacts on everyday people. You have people down here who, for the most part, the biggest complaint that we've received down here is that there are a lot of people in these communities who are tired of Washington and the Republicans and Democrats because they feel as though that they've been used as political footballs down here on the border. These are everyday people's lives, and they just want this issue solved one way or another. It doesn't matter who does it, whether they have an R or D next to their name. They just want this fixed.
And Robert, one last question for you. We see that this restriction will stay in place, but, people hear Title 42. I think sometimes that can kind of get lost in all of this. Explain what Title 42 really does, what it means.
Well, Title 42 was a policy that was put in place back in 2020. It was really a COVID restriction under the premise that because there was an ongoing pandemic, the United States could not risk having all these people who illegally crossed into the United States being here in the U.S., which is why they were being expediently removed for the sake of public health and wellness. Well, here we are in 2022. The situation has changed nationwide. Of course, we are seeing COVID start to rear its head in some parts of the country, but that's why you've seen some people say that Title 42 should be done away with. You also have people in the law enforcement community, though, that say that it is an effective tool, and right now they don't know how to operate without it. And if immigration reform is to come, they say that you need some other policy in place before you do away with Title 42.
Well, excellent reporting as always, Robert. Of course, this is breaking news. We're going to stay on it throughout rush hour, so please don't go anywhere. We'll check back in with you. But thank you, Robert. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.